Well, I don't, Cassie, have we met?
We have not. So I am with Children's Research Triangle. Usually Ann Wells joins these conversations.
Yes.
So she asked me to attend on her behalf. But yeah, so
Okay, cool. Well, welcome.
thank you.
And we are obviously a very small group, so it's very informal, and Clint and Jen know this, but like just stop me at any point, ask questions. Like it's definitely a collaborative and it's meant to be consultative and supportive. So this is for you. So ask whatever you want or need.
Okay, great.
And yeah, my caveat is that my computer is not sure that it exists fully in this plane of being anymore. So we'll see what happens. I always like to start with an opener because it sort of lets us all sit here in this space together. Cassie, what's your best memory from this strange pandemic summer?
Yeah, so I actually took a trip back in August, I want to say, about like early August, to Mackinac Island, like camping. And I was like, it's good where I can like get away. I'm not around like a lot of people and like just enjoy nature for like, we did 9 days of like just like between camping and like going to the island. So it was really nice, nice time to kind of relax and try to do something that wasn't stuck in the house.
Great. I love Mackinac. I grew up in Michigan, so it's
Nice.
like one of those special places.
Mm-hmm.
Clint, what was your best memory from the pandemic summer?
This is probably going to sound lame, but I think in terms of just, we didn't really travel too much, but I did replace an 80-foot section of privacy fence.
Oh, wow.
So I felt very accomplished, and it was nice to be outside, and it doesn't look bad. So
that is huge and more than I would have tried, I think, personally. So that's a big deal. Jen, what do you think?
I think Michigan might be the theme. Yeah, we did a week-long trip to New Buffalo, Michigan. My family and my sister's family. We stayed outside the entire time. Luckily, there was a pool. So we really just did everything outside, and it was super fun.
Nice. That's so nice.
awesome.
Carrie.
Yeah. So folks at Pi can close their ears. They're tired of hearing me talk about my dog. But we adopted a dog in July, and she has completely changed our lives for the better. So that was, has, and forever will be my highlight, I think. Such a sucker.
Well, and I'm going to echo Cassie. With my my pandemic pod, we took a driving trip to the Outer Banks of North Carolina and rented a house on the beach. And like I counted because I'm a nerd. We were less than 600 steps from the like being in the water of the Atlantic, and the water was so warm, which is unusual. It was great.
Wow.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, and if you're working remotely, I think next year we'll probably do 2 or 3 weeks because it was not crowded, and we found some of those towns on the Outer Banks are really crowded, but we found one little neighborhood that was not crowded at all, and I don't think it could be because there's just not very many houses there, so it was great. Anybody want to talk about what they're most looking forward to? It didn't feel like fall this morning when I woke up, but technically I guess it still is.
Well, we just put up our Christmas tree, so
Nice.
it doesn't seem very fallish, but
All right. Well,
at least I get something pretty to stare at while I'm quarantining.
yeah, I noticed it. I'm staying at my brother's in the suburbs this week, and I think almost everyone already has their trees up, which this year I think, why not? All right. Thank you for sharing. I feel like I have vicariously traveled and or built things, which is always helpful. Okay. The goal here, as I already said, is to really organize this group as consultative support. Obviously, each of your agencies probably have slightly different needs, but we're trying to organize a process that will help each of you move forward in addressing your needs. So general enough, but also specific enough. We'll see how we do. Today we want to build an understanding of the pre-steps necessary before making sort of any kind of technology move. And support each of you in developing steps to help you reach your technology goals. Either using resources you identify, or if we need to go out and try to help find ways to build resources, that's something we can think about as well. Just as a flashback to your first breakout meeting where we talked about technology, these are sort of the 3 big need areas relative to your internal, database technology that were identified. And I see Anne's name is spelled wrong. Cassie, don't tell her.
Okay.
So these are what we are assuming are the 3 big need areas, but we might learn something new about your needs today. So Carrie, do you want to tell a 30-second story about why we think this is a good way to start?
Sure. I used to work as a customer success manager at a database. I worked for a database, essentially, not for a database, but for a company that developed a database. And we had a lot of clients who would come in and not be really fully sort of ready to implement. And they had maybe a timeline behind them, and they felt they needed to start right away. And so they jumped in without having a lot of pre-steps worked out. And they were ultimately frustrated with the database, frustrated with their implementation, dissatisfied in the end, but not because of the actual software, but because they weren't really ready. They didn't have the infrastructure ready, they didn't have the support going, and they didn't have, I think that they rushed into it. And so I found this resource called Making Wise Decisions, and it's basically some folks put together a toolkit to help organizations think through those early stages, and before they go and implement a database, what kind of things you should have in place and resources you should have on deck. And so I just thought maybe it might be useful to this group to kind of start there, so that they aren't kind of in a position that some of these other organizations that I worked with were in, where maybe they started too soon and weren't ready, and then not even really knowing if they were ready or not, and then ended up kind of unsatisfied. So it's probably longer than 30 seconds, but.
That's okay. And I took the quiz, like thinking back on my first technology deployment when I worked many years ago. I was the director of research, evaluation, and technology at Youth Guidance. And I led their first deployment of an electronic client record. So I sort of reflected back on that process and did the quiz, and it really did raise, I thought, a lot of good questions. So we thought it would be useful but it was also really hard to figure out exactly how to answer each item because there's so many factors. So I thought it'd be worth walking through them today, sort of together, so that people could ask questions as needed. I have to stop sharing and start sharing again, right? You can't see the website yet?
No.
Okay.
The idea, though, is that everybody pulls it up on their own computer, to answer the questions on their own, and then we can talk through it. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's makingwisedecisions.org. And Carrie, can you drop it in the chat? Let me know when you're ready. Do you have it open?
Yes, sorry. I got two computers here, so I got it up on the other screen.
Awesome. Hi, Molly and Nancy. And oh my gosh, I did not see all you guys. I'm so sorry. Were you here when we were doing the roundabout questions and you didn't tell me I didn't see you? Lord have mercy. I will say a 5-year-old got me up at 5 a.m., so I am not at my best. And I don't have a 5-year-old, it's my nephew, so I'm not used to it. Okay, so let's take a look at the questions. And if you know exactly how to answer it, go ahead. But if you're not sure, I would say let's talk it through as a group. So there is tech readiness, probably pretty straightforward. Anybody not sure how to answer this and want to talk about why they might answer it one way or another and get feedback from the group? Going once? Okay, going twice. Okay, reporting needs. Anybody struggling with how to answer that? These are, the first ones are pretty straightforward. Okay. Complexity of the data. All right, data culture. What's the data culture within your organization? And tell me if I'm going too fast. Accessibility of knowledge resources. System support needs.
This is something that we came up on a lot with clients. They always needed, I think, there was a lot of need for support once they sort of, I don't know, I think that when it's demoed to you, I think the assumption is, oh yeah, this looks super easy and whatever. And then when you really get deep into the system, you realize that it takes a lot of remembering and a lot of support and a lot of training and knowing exactly what kind of support is offered by the company in advance is going to be really important. And also just the turnover in your organization is really something to think about with that as well. And who is going to be kind of in charge of the knowledge of how to use it.
Cool. I also think, at least in my experience, like even the staffs think they don't need any more training until they like really start using things. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes you think they do and they don't think they do, or they think they do.
Yeah.
I think it gets mixed up easily.
Yeah. And there is I think steps that organizations can take to maintain that knowledge, like documentation of what their processes are and what their workflows are like for each different area of the organization, so that everybody knows exactly what to do when they go into the system, instead of just always, needing another training and then not being able to get it because maybe it's too expensive, and then them getting frustrated and just sort of giving up and not entering data, and then data gets messy at that point.
Budget is probably either a really easy or really hard question to answer. All right, I don't know why I thought these were hard for me, but maybe it's because I don't have an active project. Now that I look at them again, I don't think they're that hard. Any questions about this one? Okay, check your answers or skip that step. And the report's pretty extensive and amazing. Like the quiz is so easy and straightforward. I was thinking like, what are they really gonna send? But it's pretty detailed. So I would recommend if you're putting in your email. And I did this about a month ago, and so far, I don't think I've gotten any emails from them. For those of you who are trying to manage your inbox size, which I completely understand. So once you click recommendations, based on how you answered it, it sort of tells you like in the blue, like this might be what the kind of technology solution that would be most important for your organization. The dark gray is like, well, this might be helpful to address the issues that came up in your answers. And the light gray was like, that's probably not a good idea.
Does anybody have any questions about what those categories are exactly and what they mean?
Hi, this is Meher from Apna Ghar. So could you explain exactly what the black and the gray means? I mean, I have a lot of grays for the organization and there's just one black, but I'm not very clear about the results.
Carrie, do you want to take that one or do you want me to do it?
Yeah, I can do my best. Let me know if it's not making sense. So a customizable client relationship management. Sometimes a client relationship management is also referred to as a CRM. And customizable means that your organization can create the fields and kind of take ownership over what data is collected. And the client relationships are basically clients that you put in there. They're it's sort of like a Rolodex of people that all have profiles, and they are connected through various means. Like they're connected through, or they have relationships through families, they have relationships through schools, they have relationships through programs, things like that. And you can track all of those relationships.
So, sorry, Meher, is the question what the gray colors signify, or do you have questions about what those specific terms are?
No, I'm happy to hear the specifics, but in the interest of time, if you could just tell me exactly, what the gray really means, because I don't understand what unlikely fit means or possible fit means. Like, what is the context?
I see. Based on your questions or based on how you answered, so it's just saying that like how good of a fit these different types are. So if it's a good, so possible fit is obviously like second in line. Good fit is probably your best choice. Possible fit, you might explore those options as well. But they, you know, it's just a quiz. They don't know all of the ins and outs of your needs. So, and then an unlikely fit, I would probably not investigate those. I would probably toss those out. Does that help? Just kind of when you go into researching databases, I would look into the blue first and then potentially the blacks.
Okay. All right. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Most of you probably maybe already did this, but once you click past the recommendations, you get a toolkit you can download. And you also, when you put your email in, you should have gotten an email that tells you where you can start in the toolkit relative to your specific answers. So basically, like, it gives you an assessment of what you said, what your results are, and what your good fits are. And then, did everyone get the email? No, Cassie says no.
Yeah, so I just have the PDF downloaded from the website right now, but nothing's come through yet in my email.
So the email went in my junk box. You might want to check that.
Yeah, mine also went to the junk folder.
Aha. I'm not sure how super insightful it is. But if you want to open the toolkit that you downloaded, I think that the toolkit is really good at focusing both on the process. So like, how would you go about managing a project to revise any of your technology? Even if it just was like maybe revising your reporting, or even if it was just getting your databases to talk to one another better. I think that basically their readiness phase is really setting you up to manage a very successful project and to have it implemented in a way that it gets used effectively. And then I think this is sort of what Carrie was referencing. We usually skip right to the selection and implementation piece, right? We're like, oh, well, we probably need this. Let's research what options are available to us in our price range, et cetera, et cetera. But I think these sort of readiness steps, maybe you don't need all of them, but just the idea that you have some sort of a program model, you kind of know what your workflows are, kind of know what the data is, you know who you want to do something different, and you've engaged that set of people that you want to do something different, is going to make a big difference in whether or not the implementation is successful. And so I really like this toolkit for that purpose, because it kind of walks you through that. You may not need all the readiness components, but I think especially documenting your workflows and your users is really important. Which some of you might have done that anyway. I don't know, does anyone have experience with that? Feel free to unmute and share your experience if you have any experience with that. Carrie, do you want to talk a little bit more about why a workflow and figuring out who your system users are is important? Or what it's meant in your experience, I should say?
Yeah, so workflows are like, they're like, and I apologize if some of this stuff is like, you're like, yeah, I got it. We have a database. We went through all of this, we know. But it's basically really thinking through how data needs to be captured in all the different ways within your organization. So if you have an intake process, for example, for a particular program, you think through what that process is and what that workflow is. So-and-so meets with new client, they fill out form A, B, and C in the office usually, and then they take a needs assessment. And then after the needs assessment, we look at that information, and then based on that, we assign a clinician in this category, that category, or that category. And then we send them on to that clinician, and then they go through like a goal setting process and whatever it is. I'm making all of this up. So that's one workflow. And so data gets entered in these various stages by these various people within your organization. And so mapping that out can help you develop the database to understand who the users are going to be, who is going to be entering the data, what sort of how the data needs to be sectioned off so that different people within the organization can't see it because of security measures in place in your organization, for example. Who's going to be entering it, if it's reasonable for it to be entered by hand, or if you need to do a mass upload, is it? So thinking through all of those like streams of data entry and workflows within your organization, having all of that mapped out is going to be it's going to really help you understand when you go in to develop your database. For one, the people helping you configure your database are going to get it done a lot faster because you've already thought it through, but also you can kind of figure out where maybe you're collecting too much data and you don't really need to. Maybe it's just extraneous and you've done it all the time because that's just how you do it, but nobody's ever looked at it. That data never came out on the other end in a report, or, it always got stuffed in a drawer and nobody ever cared. So if you can cut out some of those steps to make that workflow quicker, that's a good thing to think through as well within that process. But really thinking through those workflow processes can really help you understand what is going to be needed within the data system to communicate with the implementation team.
Any questions about any of that?
It's really the meat and potatoes of developing a data system.
So I think our plan, which I'm gonna have to go back to, is to give you a little bit of time to take a look at the sort of starting point in the manual that feels most meaningful to you in your organization. And that might, for those of you who have already done the sort of the mapping of the workflow and figuring out who your end users are and how to engage them, it might be skipping ahead to that section about figuring out what the right technology solution is. But we wanted to give you just a little bit of time, probably about 10 or 15 minutes to, look at the recommendations, look at the guidance, and get a sense of if this could be a good resource for starting to organize and think about how to respond to your needs. And then we wanted to sort of come back together and talk through these 3 questions. So Carrie, I don't know what time it is because I've got too much technology working in other ways. But can you tell us when it will be 15 minutes from now?
Sure. So it's 8:33 right now. So I'm sorry, 10:33. So what is that? 10:33, 10:48?
Sure. And if for some reason, please come back also with feedback about if this doesn't feel useful to you. But take about 15 minutes to dig in and look at the components that you think might be most useful. And then we will sort of discuss these questions about how we can use this resource and maybe seek out other resources to help you each move forward. Any questions? Okay. Enjoy. We'll see you at 10:48 or 8:48 if you're in San Francisco. All right, let's come back together in the next minute or so. And I think I'm going to do a round robin and ask you that second question. What activity is suggested in the manual? I'm going to assume you're back with us when you're able to turn your camera on, just because that's a really good signal for me. Or you can drop it in the chat. All right, Clint, you were back first. So tell us what activities suggested in the manual could help you guys maybe get clarity on what your process should look like, if any.
I think my answer might be a little bit different, just because we have a database in place,
Mm-hmm.
but we're definitely trying to make some significant changes to it. So I think most of the manual is still applicable. Like you're still going to have to set up a team and kind of like define your workflows and what your needs are, what your wants are for the new system. So I think definitely the biggest thing for us is workflows, is really just trying to figure out, because it's one thing to say, oh, well, I want this, that, and the other thing. I want to record this information, that information in the system. But kind of what we've found through practice is like, okay, well, we have 80 different inputs that you can put in, 80 different forms for our database, but there's no real clear path. Some folks might only use one or two of those inputs. Some other folks have to use 5 or 6. Sometimes we forget to put stuff in. Sometimes we don't complete all the forms just because there's too many. And that's the biggest thing that I think could help us, is just saying like, okay, like this is the workflow. This is who's using the system. This is why they're using it. And this is kind of the desired outcome. And this is what they need to do in order to capture the relevant information.
Okay. What do you think the gaps still are for you? Besides money. I skipped that question because I'm like, well, the answer to that is probably going to be consistent for everyone.
This might be cliche, but I think it's, for us, I mean, I think just time and the ability to physically meet nowadays is the biggest issue. I mean, I know everyone, we're all super busy, but I know just our growth, like our caseload has grown exponentially over the past 5-6 years, and we've increased staffing to some extent to try and deal with that, but just there's definitely more of a workload and a caseload for everyone. So really getting people, I could name a team, oh, this person would be great for this program, this person would be great for that program, but just getting 5 people's schedules to sync up right now to actually meet and discuss what changes we want to implement, that's probably the most difficult thing and probably the biggest.
Yeah. Nancy, what about you?
I was checking in with Molly in those 15 minutes, and we, for our counseling and court advocacy program, we have a database in place. So we completed the data mapping, and we have all those little details from intake point to goals to evaluations. We have all of that on our narratives, that then goes into a spreadsheet. So I feel like we have that. I think what came up for us is really using the data now that we have that captures services clients seen this month, and use that to generate final reports. I think that we had the system that we have in place was not working as well. So right now we're receiving support to rely on this database more and trust that it will help us, complete those final reports. But for those two programs, we feel like, okay, we have something, we just need to tweak it and use it. I think
Mhm.
for the prevention education program, we are in the data mapping stage. So we're starting from the beginning. And with that comes also training staff. So there is more gaps there because we're still establishing a database there. So we're like in the first beginning steps. So we're in different places depending on different programs.
Yep.
Are you
Yeah.
using the same database for both of these programs?
I think Molly, you want to help me with that? I think for court and counseling, we're using the same. Prevention education, it's not a program that I oversee, so I'm not quite sure, but I'll let Molly
Yeah.
take that.
So we're a domestic violence agency, and our direct service data can come from InfoNet. So our reports kind of are built from InfoNet, which is really helpful. For our prevention and education arm, there's not a system that exists for kind of that data tracking that we can pull data from, run these wonderful reports that have been built for us. So it's kind of adjusting and developing a new system to just pull the data generally that then can be run, which is kind of the slowdown in that area.
But everything working on InfoNet.
Yeah.
Sounds like, yeah. Okay.
But the challenges with InfoNet is that it pulls a lot of data from our intake. They did the data mapping, but there are some data that is required by funders that's not reflected and pulled
Right.
in InfoNet or looks a little bit different.
Mhm.
So now we have InfoNet as a database, one of the main databases where funders pull reports from, that somehow needs to be consistent with our internal database, which that's what I was sharing about. That's more time. So, going back to challenges, that is more time because now have a current internal database that are about 17 people between counseling and court entering this data. So
Mhm.
there will be mistakes, and somehow this needs to be very close to the data reflected in InfoNet. So we have two databases now that we're working from. And to me, that is just a challenge, in a systematic challenge. Yeah.
What's your
Yeah.
internal database that you're using?
It was created actually with your support,
Yeah.
Pi support. We worked with Jay as our consultant, and he helped us do all the data mapping from the beginning with counseling and court.
Right. It's like a big Excel
It's
situation.
Yes, that is
Excel,
correct.
yeah.
Okay, it's not
Yes.
like you didn't buy a subscription to a database. Got it.
No.
Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. And Marla's here taking notes so we can sort of break out into tables, I think, what your needs are. So it sounds like there's still some gaps. Did you find the manual to maybe be helpful in thinking about how to address at least the prevention education piece moving forward?
Yes. I mean, it outlines the steps that clearly, and I think we have some level of experience doing that with counseling and court,
Right.
and I know that makes it's almost like an anchor for us when we want to do that for prevention education.
And I didn't even ask you, so I'm going to ask you now, what is your favorite memory from the pandemic summer?
Oh, beach.
Yeah.
Oh, every week, I think forest and beach and being outdoor, doesn't matter where, but having an opportunity to be outdoor, that was a good, it almost forced us to, myself and my family to be outdoors, which was really nice.
Molly, what about
Thanks for
you?
asking.
I also have a Michigan memory, so just add
Ah,
that. Yeah. No, my sister-in-law got married, so we had a small little Michigan ceremony that was socially distanced and safe, but it was really nice.
nice.
Yeah.
Cassie, what activities do you think suggested in the manual could help you guys get clarity on what your process should look like?
Yeah, so I think with us, because like what the conversation has been is like looking at a new electronic medical record system. So like we have this one and it's okay, but I don't think it's quite meeting the needs. So kind of like helping to guide the conversations around like, okay, like what is it that we really want to get out of like adopting something new? How do we make it work with like the databases in Excel that like we've set up? Um, and like could like those things be done in a more electronic format as opposed to our team just doing them by hand essentially. um so really helping to like guide and think about like what is it when we start to like look at other vendors that we really want to incorporate when we start to go that route.
So, and this might suggest some of the ways you want to map out what's missing.
Yeah, what's missing, like what are we currently using that's not helpful, so like what can we kind of essentially toss out. Yeah, like how do we involve like our therapists and the things that they submit to us, as far as assessments and trauma measures and things like that when they're interacting with clients, so that like on their end it's also easier. um and if it is like two systems, maybe like how do we get those two things to talk to each other. So really just being mindful of like all that background work that would need to be thought about.
Anybody have any ideas for Cassie? Anybody gone through that process yet? Or Nancy or Molly, I forgot to ask. Okay. Any gaps in what you know? Bye, Jen. Thank you.
Right.
Cassie, sorry. Any
Yeah.
gaps in what you think you know or need to do?
I mean, there are gaps. I mean, I'm also still pretty new to Children's Research Triangle, so a lot of it is just like personally like learning like what our budget looks like, and like having conversations with people about the process because I don't really use it. So trying to figure out like how to help them incorporate something new is like another kind of gap, because like we can say that we want this thing, but like not really sure how to lay that out. So there's just like a lot of at least personal gaps there for me.
It will come together. And I think maybe the toolkit will sort of help like guide the questions and the sequence of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
But we can also have an offline conversation with Carrie and I if that's useful to you.
Yeah.
Cassie, I'm curious, how many data systems have you guys like not researched, but have you gotten any demos from anybody or anything?
No, not yet. So we're currently using Glow as our system. That's, yeah, like not quite meeting all of our needs for now.
So you do want to probably migrate to a different one.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I would say, and maybe someone has had experience with this, I don't know, is it would be really important to try to project like what you, and of course projecting into the future seems even harder than it used to, but like what needs would you anticipate maybe happening in the next 5 years? If if you grew as an organization, if your funding changed, like how can you at least try to anticipate not the specific needs, but like what kind of flexibility you would want in a system so that it could adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes organizations do that by looking back on like changes they didn't expect that came in the last 5 years. The first time I went through a system implementation, we did not do that. And that was, or we didn't do it very well. But like anything you can do to sort of identify points of flexibility that you think will be important so that you can pivot, because I think there'll be a lot of pivots in the industry in the next 5 years, might be useful and might help you pick out a different piece of technology than you might otherwise choose.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up too. So
there's a resource inside of this. If you go through, I don't know where it's situated exactly, but it's super interesting way to kind of dig down to where the problems are exactly with the system. If you're feeling like the system that you have isn't working for you and you have a whole bunch of people that are using it, it's called something like the 5 whys. And it's how you can drill down by asking, like, you know, so what the problem is, and then asking why 5 times down, and it really drills down to the core of the problem. And you can really kind of, I don't know, I think it's look for it in the resource guide.
Yeah, it probably just gets more to the root of like, why do we want to change whatever it is?
Yeah, because a lot of times people, like with data systems especially, they just get so frustrated, and at the end, so if the problem is data isn't getting entered for this particular, like demographic data isn't getting entered on time, you'll realize by asking those within that chain that like maybe at the very root of it is that your clinicians don't have access to the internet 5 days a week. Maybe they are getting kicked off the internet or something like that, but it's not really obvious at the beginning. All you see at the top level is that data
that's missing. Yeah.
So it gives an opportunity for people to kind of get to the bottom of what's actually going on, and you might be able to solve some of your problems without needing a new data system at all.
Yeah.
Now, Meher, please tell me if I said your name wrong.
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
It is Meher.
Okay. What activities suggested in the manual do you think you could help your organization sort of get clarity on what your process could look like?
Yeah, I think the toolkit is really important. So just like our friends at Between Friends, a lot of what they said totally resonates with us. So for us, our data management system is the InfoNet. And to be honest, it's not the best data management system. It is, it's full of challenges. There's just so many limitations in that. Unfortunately for us, there is a huge reliance on InfoNet just because, we use that for our funder reporting. But we are, there are just so many important indicators that are not being covered and are not being looked into or being tracked, and that's something as a programs manager I've been trying to work. Before I joined Apna Ghar, I think there was an attempt to explore Salesforce and see how that could be used as a case management system, but that fell through too. And then, we had just about started to talk about what could another potential system be, but then we were hit by COVID and all of that, fell off the radar. So the toolkit is definitely, I was just going through some of those sections, and it's really helpful in terms of, setting out a roadmap and, a very structured sort of a thinking. The only challenge I see is, the work is growing exponentially at Apna Ghar. We've added 2 more sites to our work, 2 more locations basically. So the client load is increasing, the staff is increasing. And so again, I think we're just faced by 2 important questions as to who should be doing this, because the bulk of the staff are the direct service staff, and they don't have the time. Some of them are pretty tech savvy, are interested in this kind of thing, but it's just kind of difficult to pull them away from client services right now. So that's like the big challenge. And then at the managerial level, literally, other than me, there isn't anybody else who is interested or is like really involved. So I have the executive director, and then there's myself. So there is like a human resource crunch, I would say. And then again, I think we are definitely constrained by the budget and finances available for this sort of work, which is why we don't want to go like big in any way, but we do want, something to get started with. And it is, we are on that, I think, on that crossroads where we definitely need something soon, because as I said, that the client load is really increasing, and we really need a system soon to not just manage the case information, client information, but also to help us with the larger questions around, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Other important pieces, just because Infonet, gets information which is almost all of it is quantitative. There is so much of like the qualitative piece of our work that's not being tracked. So that's another big piece that I am personally interested in, in making possible and making sure that we have some sort of a system where we are looking into the qualitative indicators of our work as well. So yeah, while I think that this is a great opportunity and this is a superb toolkit, I am a bit unsure about its actual implementation and how far can we be so process oriented. And, yeah, so I think that's my initial thought.
Yeah. And it sounded like Clint was saying at least some parts of his concern about time were similar, right? Like,
yes.
And that is a significant challenge.
It is, yeah, considering the times that we are in, and this is going to go on for definitely a considerable amount of time. So
yeah, Michelle too, she says.
Yeah.
Any ideas for Meher?
I just have a quick question for you. Are you wanting to, are you able to leave Infonet, or do you need to stay on Infonet and you need to get a secondary system for the case management while still putting data into Infonet?
Okay, much as we would love to leave Infonet,
yes,
not leave Infonet.
So you have to get like a supplementary system.
So we have to get a supplementary or some sort of a parallel system.
Yeah.
Infonet is the funder required system for the state of Illinois.
And in all fairness, ICJ is doing a lot right now in terms of improving it, adding indicators. So, in all fairness, they're definitely trying to improve the system too. So they've been doing a lot of self-reflection on that, which is good. But, it still hasn't reached a point where it's really, fully serving our purpose.
Yeah. Any ideas on the qualitative piece that Meher mentioned? Anyone who's figured out a way to gather some qualitative data? You can unmute and share, or you can agree that it's a challenge.
We have, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
We have a program survey at the end of the quarter that we fill out to provide the narrative piece, successes, challenges, client stories. And this is how we collect the qualitative or more of a narrative of how the quarter went. I think that's what comes to mind.
So your staff are filling out a survey, but you're asking them sort of qualitative questions.
Yes. Yeah.
Michelle, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so we've tried a multitude of approaches not necessarily anything super effectively. Like, I don't think we've hit a silver bullet with this, but we've tried similarly to what Nancy just suggested, our end of year survey for clinicians and having some qualitative questions and opportunities there. One thing we're trying more recently, just to share that lift together as a team, is having some members from development join the clinical team in different departments have regular meetings. And so particularly for our school-based therapy program, we're trying to get some stories out of that. And so having a member of the development team join that meeting once every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you pick your frequency, and asking some of the qualitative questions that we know come up in grants, and just ones to flesh out this data and the stories. Again, that's not like really a regimented way of collecting data per se. It's more of a narrative approach. But the clinicians, I think, can then think in the moment of what happened this week, what happened this month. When we've done the quarterly or end of year, at least for myself as a clinician trying to think back, I'm like, I don't know. I can't think of anything. I get stuck. But there's something about in that moment, and not asking them to write it down, they're usually, we found, more likely to share a little more.
Yeah,
I
thank
like that.
you. That's helpful.
Diane, not unimportantly, Meher, what's your best memory from the pandemic summer?
Ooh. So my husband and I braved a trip to Wisconsin Egg Harbor. Yeah, and we managed to get this really neat place right on the lake, so we didn't really have to venture out too much. We got this little cottage, so we were able to cook and do everything, just hanging around near the lake. So that was fun, 3 or 4 days.
Very nice. Last but never least, Michelle. Were there any activities suggested in the toolkit that could really help you guys get clarity on what your process should look like?
Yes, I'm sure. And I think I have to echo what Meher said earlier, which is just thinking about the bandwidth of staffing for this in implementation, and even just diving into this process. I think at JPA, we're always talking about building the boat as we're going somewhere. And so we're like in this little rowboat trying to patch some holes, and also, by the way, trying to build this, I don't know boats. What's a big boat? Yacht? A cruise ship? I don't know, but something that maybe is not the thing to build right now. And so that's always our struggle, especially in these times, how to launch this process in the midst of so many other things, not to mention financial resources.
Sure.
Really tight. I know that doesn't directly answer your question.
That's okay. Do you feel like there's still gaps in what you need to know?
Yeah, in total transparency, I popped into this because I have a standing 10 a.m. meeting right before, and so I think I would need to sit and think more critically about that to give you a worthwhile answer beyond, yeah, probably.
Always a safe answer. It sounds like overall what I'm hearing is we're not sure how to find time to do this. Most of you, I'm guessing, even though not all of you brought it up, would want to identify additional resources, financial resources, to actually complete it. So the challenge right now might be like, how do we carve out the tiniest amount of time to move forward with the workflow and the process mapping and learning what we need to learn, so that everything that needs to be done internally is organized, while we're looking for the financial resources to make it happen. I think one of the things that Jen wasn't here to talk about, but her experience, I think, was, and I'm putting a few words in her mouth, so I may be incorrect, they had the money in place, but they hadn't done the process pieces as much. And so while they were taking time to do the process pieces, then COVID happened, then the money went away. So I think there is a strong argument to be made for like, how can we map out everything and be ready to rock so that as soon as we identify the financial resources, we're ready to go, which I'm not saying that like it's easy. I understand it's not. Oh, look at, I just answered that question for you. Any other next steps you feel like this suggests? Or any ideas on how to tackle the time thing?
I was just going to say, I think that it might help to also think about it instead of, I mean, I know I do this when I think of something as big as implementing a new data system. I get really overwhelmed with all of the stuff that, you know, where we want it at the very end, and it feels impossible. But really, when you implement a data system, you can do it in layers and in phases, and you can start with just one important workflow in your organization that only involves 2 people, you know, but it has some, it's you know, like phase 1 of your implementation. You can do just that, get people used to it. It'll cost minimal because you've only got 2 users. You're thinking through the process, but at a very limited level. And then you can start to build in new processes and new programs and new people, and you can grow it from there. So don't forget that that's also a way that you can approach it.
And Michelle, I forgot to ask you, what's your favorite pandemic summer memory?
Let's see. My daughter was born at the end of spring, beginning of summer. So I think my favorite summer pandemic memory is when daycare reopened for my 2 kids.
Oh, well, congratulations. That's amazing. And a little stressful.
Yeah, 2 kids in a pandemic. Oh.
Okay. So before we answer this question on the screen, let's talk about what one next step is that each of you could take internally, and one next step that you think you need help with from the network. Just to be really specific and sort of have some, you know, touch points for what we do next prior to like it being worth pulling this group together again.
So I was gonna say, I was thinking for me, it would be like we have like a standing meeting with like the research team. So I would take this back to them, let them know what was discussed here, how I saw the toolkit, and encourage my supervisor to try and see, you know, what if she answers questions similar or different, and where things kind of line up to take immediate next steps. And then I think what would be helpful is like if there was maybe like a resource list of like networks or organizations that help, that like, you know, people in here have used or know about, that may be worth looking into, to start like having conversations with developers, to try to help like see where a good fit could be made.
Okay. I may circle back with you and Anne and ask you to sort of like lay out maybe a more specific set of needs that you're trying to address, and then we'll circle back with people and ask them that question.
Okay,
because I
yeah.
think we might need a little more context.
All right.
For us, Jennifer, at Ratnagar, you know, I am meeting the executive director actually this afternoon, and I would like to like put this back as a priority for the organization for the coming months. So that's a conversation I'm going to have really soon. And then, you know, I think it's time that we start really planning around it. So, you know, I really want this to go parallelly with what's happening at PI. So, so yeah, that's my thing. But the request that I would want to make to you is, if there are examples of organizations, within the network or outside the network that you are familiar with who have done this in, while navigating around all the challenges that we've shared with you, if there are some examples, if there's some case stories, if somebody can come and speak with us, and share that and answer to some of those really practical questions that we pose to you and give a real experience, I think that would be helpful. I know this might be a big ask and it might be difficult to just find that right organization, but I'm sure there are out there. And, so I think something which can be, a little bit more practical in terms of really addressing some of the challenges that we voiced here today would be really helpful.
Okay. And if anybody on here has any ideas about who might be a good case study, please drop it in the chat. Anybody else? Molly and Nancy or Clint? Michelle?
Kind of just going off of like you said before, I think everyone is kind of struggling with the issue of time. I know obviously, you need the, buy-in from the C-level folks to really get a project like this going. So I guess I'm assuming we already have some buy-in from the higher ups. Maybe it's also worth kind of, in addition to that, saying like, hey, listen, like, look, these are the steps that are needed to have a successful deployment or a successful reconfiguration of the system. Like, obviously, like, you can say, okay, great, go ahead, I agree with it, but maybe go a step further and say like, hey, we need the supervisors and the managers and the directors to say like, okay, listen, like, if you're on this team, like, you are meeting once a month or bi-weekly or what have you, kind of like really set it in stone. Like, you need to meet, you need to go through this process because it's critical to actually having a good implementation. And that might be a way, like, because if you just say, hey, can you join this team? Hey, can we meet to review this? Everyone's going to have that same answer, like, oh, well, I'm busy, or, oh, let's reschedule. But if you actually say, this is the meeting time, be there, and it's coming from the higher ups, then that might help this process move along more smoothly.
That's probably a great idea for everyone. Like, if your executive director or CEO is not behind this, it might not be a good time to push that envelope. And what do you think? What does it suggest for the network to support your process? You don't have to need it. That's okay.
To really, like, what's helped me, it just kind of in past endeavors, honestly, just discussing other people's processes and other people's experiences with their endeavors. I mean, that's really, at least for me, that seems to be the most beneficial, is hearing, because having like a toolkit like this is nice. It's a nice template, but actually hearing, discuss it. I've had several ETO discussions with other folks from different CACs, and that is immensely helpful. Just, kind of seeing that, everyone's kind of facing similar challenges, and just seeing what they did, what was effective, what was not effective. So I think just kind of actually having like these, involved discussions, and just seeing what actually, what in practice actually works for people, so that we can implement it ourselves.
Well, and I'll hook you up with new moms right after this. And they're also using ETO, and they're really pushing the envelope on a lot of things. So that might be a good discussion. Michelle, or my Between Friends ladies, anything?
I think for us, we have the supplement database. I think we need to continue to work on fine-tuning it, and starting data mapping for the prevention education program. Understanding what data exactly we need to collect, what are some of the funder requirements, so we can be able to just put the necessary data that would be useful. So continuing to do what we're doing, what I think. I don't know that we want to add something new to what we're already doing. We have a path now. We just need to actually take those steps and get the staff trained so we're all consistently using the system and using it effectively.
Any steps that you think the network could take to help you with that?
We are working with our consultant. We can never at all do this without him and his expertise. Because, speaking of myself, I needed many hours of training. Tech is not my, it's not accessible to me. So the training, he's doing training, he's revising our database, comparing it to InfoNet, and that's been very, very helpful. That could not be possible without Pi support, for sure.
Nice. Michelle, last but not least.
Again, echoing what others have said. So I think next steps internally for us is I need to get a sense of where this falls in the priorities. I know it is one, and also what does that process look like for us and where we are in that stage in that process. I think the 5 whys is actually really helpful. That's going to help me dive a little deeper to understand what's going on. So thank you for that. I also think what could be helpful is maybe knowing what options are out there. We're looking to switch to an EHR, EMR. It's just so overwhelming. So I think hearing what's working for other people, how they're set up, that could be helpful. And then, yes, definitely to Clint's point, a structured schedule with this. For example, like this day, this time, for me, I couldn't commit to because I already have something in place, and I don't like jumping in so late. I feel like I missed so much of the importance of this. But if there was something that could be worked into the schedule and I can plan around and protect that time, that would be helpful to know in advance.
Well, so go ahead, Carrie, sorry.
I just wanted to say Pi is, we have meetings every once in a while where we get demos from various data systems, because we work with a lot of clients who have data system needs, and we want to be kind of aware of what systems are out there and what could be useful for them to tell them, hey, check out this data system. Anyway, so I've requested that we record all of those so that I can share with this collective, just so everybody knows that that is something. We have one actually, I think next week. So I'll just reach out to all of you and say, here's a recording of a demo that we got from this data system. I don't even know what it's called right this second, but just so you know, I've kind of requested that for you guys too.
So I think what we'll do, is we'll type up all of your next steps and what you need us to do and share it back out. It sounds to me like in general, it's how do we break it down into small enough pieces that we can figure out how to make the time. Hey, it'd be really helpful to see some case studies on how people got this done and made all these connections. And then maybe, for a few of you, like, look, we needed some help and some feedback on picking a system. So we'll have to make sure we can get your needs cataloged so we can share that back out with the group in a sort of systemic way. And then Michelle, I hear you about sort of standardizing. One of the things that is really important to me is that we don't meet just to meet, right? So that we're scheduling it to make sure that it's really useful and meeting your needs. And we always try to give a couple of weeks lead time. Unfortunately, I had a bad reaction to the flu shot last week. So that is why we had to postpone it at the last minute, because I was not functional. So one thing that would be super, so I think what I would like to do is commit to pulling together some, case study stuff for you in January. And obviously we'll plan that ahead by about 3 weeks. I'm not sure it makes sense to have a regular monthly meeting. although I'm happy to put it on the calendar and cancel it. So I need some information in the chat about how you would prefer to handle that. Because I never want to meet just to meet. Like, I want to make sure it's meeting people's needs. So if you'd rather have a regular monthly meeting and then we remove it from the calendar if we don't need it, or if you'd rather have them scheduled on an as needed basis, just let me know in the chat. I think the last question is sort of, how does this consultative format work for people? You know, it's not 100% specific to each of your needs. So we're trying to strike a balance between general and specific. So let me know, like, great or good, or I'm not really sure this is going to work for me. So it'd be really helpful if you could also either unmute and talk about that if you want, or feel free to drop it in the chat, just so we know how to sort of adjust to meet your needs as best as possible. Carrie, is there anything else you want to add?
No.
Okay, so yeah, please.
Oh, sorry. Just a possible suggestion for this last. I think it's good. Maybe if, you know, depending on, you know, where everyone is, you know, we could even just do kind of like how we had that 15 minutes to read the toolkit. Maybe even just, you know, spend some time, do like a breakout room within Zoom to kind of group up with people who are at a similar stage in the process, and you can have those smaller, you know, kind of more specific group discussions. You know, and then kind of like, you know, meet back with the larger group afterwards, just so you can get kind of the best of both worlds.
Hi, Michelle. Thank you. Yeah, that's a great idea. Anything else you'd like to see different in the future about these groups and how they're organized? And you're allowed to think of it later too. Okay. I know that I'm sure we're at time, and I know people may have other commitments, so we don't want to make you late for anything. But if there's any other questions you have, feel free to unmute. It was nice to see everybody. I appreciated taking your vicarious vacations with you. And I would, you know, we'll definitely circle back with you on the individual things, remind you what you said you were going to follow up with, and then plan to get back together in January, and maybe we'll do a case study and then some specific breakouts for people who are tackling the same issues. And it looks like APNA-GAR and Between Friends are connected around adding a supplemental database. And Clint, I'll connect you to New Moms. And Cassie, if you decide you want to be added to the supplemental database discussion, I can let them know too. All right, anybody need anything else? It's lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for spending your screen time with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Have a good week and holiday, Thanksgiving, whatever transpires. Bye.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.